Hey, it's Adam here, and you're watching The Culture Hack, where we're talking about how to create engaged workspaces that unlock the potential of your teams and drive your business forward in ways you've never seen. So stay tuned.
Hello and welcome to The Culture Hack. Today is going to be fun. I have another culture expert on with me. I have with me Shane Wallace. He is the founder of CultureSmith, and I'm super excited to have him on here. He also has the same haircut as me, so welcome, Shane. Thanks for coming on the show.
No problem. Yes, identical haircuts.
Right? Yeah.
It's the sign of a healthy culture.
There, exactly. Right? There
you have to get rid of the hair so that there's no hair to pull out.
Right? You can't get frustrated. You're
exactly.
Just like, oh, I got to work through it.
You have to, exactly. You have to actually go speak to people. Yeah.
That is amazing. But tell us about CultureSmith. What do you guys do?
CultureSmith. So we work, we actually just did a breakdown last week in terms of what our client base, we've been doing this for about a decade without ever really looking at sort of our client mix. And it kind of fell into sort of two main categories. So nonprofit organizations and what we would call scale-ups. So those organizations that have hit kind of 25 employees and are adding. Those two organizations we work with primarily to help them create culture, but create culture in a way that the output of it is to increase the emotional well-being of their employees. So functionally, without getting too technical, our work establishes psychological safety within the teams of the organizations. Psychological safety itself is the degree to which people are asking questions, owning mistakes, offering feedback, challenging the status quo, basically any interpersonal risk, anything where they'd be afraid to speak up and the organization is going to suffer as a result of them not speaking up. We have some form of programming or system that is going to help do that. So like at the top of our website, it says, you can hire the smartest people in the world. If you don't create a culture where they feel safe to speak up, you're kind of locking all of that intelligence within their brains and defeating the purpose of going through all the rigor of hiring them.
I love it. I love it, right? It sounds so simple, right? But so many people struggle with it for reasons, right?
I feel like I think part of the reason is because we didn't start off as organizational psychologists, right? Like we were founders ourselves and launched businesses and scaled them. And you get into, I was having a conversation with a VC a couple of weeks ago, looking at the deals that they were doing and how, out of 10 deals, if 2 are home runs, 2 they lose money on, and everything else they break even on, that's considered like really successful. Mm-hmm. And I was like, that just seems like only in baseball can you be that crappy and be considered elite, like that low percentage of success. And so when I said, well, when you look at the deals that you backed, like how many bad ideas do you back? And he's like, well, none. He's like 100% of the time it's people. Right? When we get money involved, it changes people's behavior, or as they scale and they add to their teams. So yeah, to your point, it seems simple, but we are not simple as people. And when we throw a whole bunch of people together, things happen. And so our entire process is sort of based off this science called affective neuroscience, which is basically the pathways emotion travels in the brain. Mm-hmm. And once you understand how emotion travels through the brain and how the environment influences that, you can start to shape the environment, the culture, to basically generate the type of emotion that you want. Right? Because I think it's important to know, like a culture is not a happy place. It's a myth that a high functioning culture is a happy place. A high-functioning culture is a place where people are constantly discussing the gap between where they are and where they should be. It's engaged, it's energized, but it's not happy. And I think, I don't know if you see the same thing, in your travels, but we see so many leaders kind of fall into that trap where if a culture issue is identified, they think they have to make it nice, make a nice place to work.
Right.
And nice doesn't really do it.
It's like the Alberta solution is like hosting a barbecue. We'll have a barbecue.
Yeah.
It'll be great. Right?
And it's and I understand where it comes from. I mean, that's something we can do. It's easy to do. But it's also easy to throw more money at people or put beanbag chairs in the break room or put a foosball table in. And it's not going to move the needle on whether or not somebody cares about their job. When we look at a culture, the perks that we'll get calls on things like benefit plans and compensation plans, or like, should we put beanbag chairs and foosball tables out in the space? And those are all sort of headline grabbing things, but they're not culture. If you look at the definition of a culture, it's the beliefs and behaviors that separate one group of people from another. So if you believe that, we should have an open office, if you believe that having recreational things artifacts within your office, okay, great. But thinking that those perks are what's going to attract and retain people, I mean, that's not going to make people care about their jobs anymore. And that's the big challenge. Like, we have to give people, your culture needs to give people a reason to want to go to work. It's, and very few do. Very few do. We sort of have it backwards in a lot of organizations. When you understand a little bit of social psychology and sort of how our brains, the emotional pathways in our brains formed during a time when we were in groups of 200 and 300. And because that's what we needed to stay safe. And as we thrived and started colonizing the entire planet, we started breaking into smaller groups because we didn't need these big groups for safety. And eventually, these smaller groups started becoming threats. And so when you think of the workplace as a social group, it's the most bizarre social group we're ever going to join. Because we spend a disproportionate amount of time in that group relative to our other social groups. We don't choose any of our group members. We are stuck with the teams that we're given. And by and large, we go to that group to harvest resources to bring to our other groups. We go and we get money to feed our family. And so when we put all of that together, that social group becomes very threatening. There's no social identity. We actually get more protective of our self-identity. And so the organizations, like, all the pandemic did was show, from a cultural standpoint, is the tide went out and it showed who had built culture and who hadn't. Because the organizations that built culture, they had people like they had individuals that saw their company in pain and found an extra gear to serve the company. The majority of organizations, is a really unpopular opinion, but the majority of organizations that are still fighting with getting people to return to office have poor culture. It's not a group of entitled, well, it actually is a group of entitled people. When entitlement is an unreasonable request brought on by a disruption of self-concept. So when we don't know where we fit in a social group, we ask for the moon so that when whatever response we get back tells us where we fit. If I ask for a whole bunch of stuff and I get it, I know where my status is in the group. If I'm told to go pound sand, I know where my status is in the group. So organizations that will call us up and say, hey, we're really wrestling with an entitlement issue, are typically not thrilled when we start telling them that the remedy isn't brainwashing their employees into caring more. It's like, you got to build a culture that people want to come to work.
Right.
And that it's work and it's daily effort. You can't build a culture. It's not a set and forget proposition. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I love this idea, right? Like, we often talk to people and say, like, think of it as a strategy or a discipline the same as any other. You have accountants, you have IT people, you've got operations people. Like, culture is the same. It will exist. It will do what it wants unless you pay attention to it very carefully.
Yeah, 100%.
And I've actually run into many companies recently that have said, hey, we went to this hybrid model where, Mondays and Fridays they can work from home, and then Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays in the office, but it's not really working. So in the new year, everyone's in the office, and that's the new rule, and we're done with it. Mm-hmm. And I'm curious your opinion on it, because for me, I'm kind of thinking, well, remote work's not going away. You're going to fight this battle eventually.
So two things I say on that.
Later.
First of all, mandating Mondays and Fridays at home and Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday in the office isn't a hybrid. That's not flexible. It's not flexible. When you're just changing the location, work happens, but you're still dictating the days. Mm-hmm. If you're saying I have to be here Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, it's not a hybrid model. You're just, you're letting people work from home. But what people want out of this is autonomy. They want to be treated like adults. So the second thing is when they say, okay, we're just putting in a rule, you got to be in office. The top of our website says culture rules without rules. Mm. If you need rules, you do not have culture.
I like that.
Right? So can I ask, when you drive, how often do you speed?
I don't know. If the flow of traffic is speeding, I'm speeding.
Well, right? There you go. You've answered the question. Is the number one cause of speeding is the flow of traffic.
Right.
So when the flow of traffic is breaking the speed limit, right, you're all collectively breaking the rules. Mm-hmm. Why isn't one of you, why aren't you slamming on the brakes and screaming at everybody to obey the speed limit? What's the value of that rule?
Fair point, right? And
why do we have speed limits? What's the purpose of a speed limit?
I guess fundamentally the argument is to keep people from speeding, so that for safety, right?
Safety, exactly. So, Adam, if you just kind of try and picture the number of times, consciously or otherwise, you've sped in your life. Mm-hmm. How many times have you hurt somebody?
Well, 0, knock on wood.
Exactly. Every time we speed and we don't hurt somebody, we disconfirm the value of a speed limit in our brain. But here's the problem, is accidents happen rarely. Within any individual's lifetime, the odds of being in an accident are really low. Mm-hmm. But when an accident happens, speed is always a factor. Yeah. And the more speed, the more fatality. Right? And that's the thing with culture and here's the thing, speeding tickets do not improve speeding behavior. The University of Maryland did a meta-study on it that showed you were actually twice as likely to speed within the 12 months of getting a speeding ticket because your autonomy has been taken away. We don't consciously speed. Unless you're my wife and you intentionally set the cruise at a predetermined speed above the speed limit.
Okay. Yep.
Right? The majority of speeding behavior is unintentional. So when we get punished for unintentional mistakes, there's a part of our brain, the amygdala switches over to where we feel we are being socially punished. We're about to be excommunicated from the group, and it's unfair. Mm-hmm. It's the same reason why you can be the best driver in the world, but the second a cop pulls up behind you at a red light, you get anxious.
Right. Yeah.
That cop can give you a ticket. You cannot give the cop a ticket. There's a power imbalance. So when a leader says, I need you to work in the office, that they're killing psychological safety, full stop, because the leader can fire somebody. The other person cannot fire the leader. It's an asymmetric shift in power. And anytime our power is taken away from us, we will unconsciously dip into whatever power we have. Well, what power do we have as individuals? Reputational power. We trash them on Glassdoor and LinkedIn, right? Information power. We start hoarding information. We stop sharing. We stop speaking up at meetings. All of these things are power that the brain automatically influences us to do to reset equilibrium when we feel we're being marginalized. Because we still have this evolutionary echo that if we don't belong to the group, we're going to die. That our evergreen source of safety is going to go away. And so that's the problem. If you can make the workplace, if you can make culture a group, a primary social group, where my needs are actually met at work. I don't go to work to harvest resources to take back to others. I actually have needs met at work that I cannot meet in any other social group. I get to work on cool projects. I get to work with really smart people. I get to build relationships that I don't get to build anywhere else. You focus on that. You will never have turnover. You will have an innovation pipeline. You will have a leadership pipeline, people just begging to. You'll have the appropriate mix of people ready to take the next step into leadership, and those self-aware enough to realize they don't want to be leaders. They actually want to be led by a great leader. And pomp, location of work, beanbag chairs, none of that addresses any of it. Like, if you're a leader and you want to do that stuff just because it's fun and it's nice, go do it. But don't mask it as we've got a great culture. Just check this out. Yeah.
I like that idea, right? Like people are always looking for, what's the quick win or the easy solution? And you look over there and those guys never have turnover and they have beanbag chairs. So let's get beanbag chairs, right? It's obvious. Whereas, as you say, it's a pattern of behavior. It's a series of decisions, consistency every day, thousands of little things, that all adding up to this 100%. Value of the social group, right?
If I could give like sort of one last thing on what you said there, I don't know if you've ever read the book, The Culture Code, but when he talks about Greg Popovich, the head coach of the San Antonio Spurs, and how in the NBA, the way analytics run, you can forecast with relative accuracy how many games a team should win at the beginning of the season based on the talent on the roster. And any wins above that number is called wins above expectation, and it's attributed to coaching. It's attributed to leadership. And Popovich's number is off the charts relative to any other NBA coach in history. Like, he basically has his teams winning more than they ever realistically should. And so when you look at it, when you say, like, look over here, they've got beanbag chairs and they've got a great culture, you Google him and you go through YouTube videos, you're just going to see him screaming at his players. Right? And so everybody's, you got to be a hard ass, you got to be a disciplinarian. That's how you get results. Nobody thinks to interview the players. Because if you interview the player and you say, when he screams at you like that, how does it make you feel? To a person, they will say, it makes me feel loved. Because what they don't see is the fact that at the age of like 60, Popovich learned 4 new languages. Because they started recruiting players from Europe, and he wanted them to feel like they belonged. He wanted them to speak in their native tongue at practice. So he learned their language. Right? Like, he does these little things to create belonging and connection so that when it's game time, when you hear them talk about him, they'll say, like, we recognize that he's willing to risk looking like a jackass on national TV because he cares enough about us winning. Like it's not him being a hard ass. It's him actually risking his reputation because the game's on the line, because they see him in practice. They know how much he cares, and he builds it into the culture.
This really reminds me of I read a book about Jack Welch and General Electric in the 90s.
Yeah.
And everyone, if you ask about Jack Welch, people will immediately say, "Oh, 10%."
Yep, force ranking.
10%, right?
Yep.
And oh my God, what a horrible way, like what a ruthless concept, blah, 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 blah. But then I read the book and you realize like that philosophy was part of a hugely integrated cultural system and strategy. You know, he talks about boundaryless, all this other things. So people just took that piece and applied it because I guess it was easier or whatever. And if you just do that, it's terrible.
Well, right? It is. You're 100% right. You're preaching to the choir there, because part of what Welch said, and I need to be clear, like we don't fully support the methodology, but the one philosophy within it that we do is that bottom 10%, your top 10% deserve to work with rock stars. Mm. And your top 10% do not feel threatened when you add top performers to their team. Your top 10% feel threatened when you are willing to allow bottom performers. Like where the metric gets out of touch is when you've built that high performing culture. And your bottom 10% would be the top 10% anywhere else. That's when it gets ruthless. That's when the Welchian model needs to go away. But for most organizations that are scaling, your bottom 10% is a harmful bottom 10% to your culture. Mm-hmm. So it's age and stage, right? Like it comes down to why you're doing it. If you're just doing it to cut costs and be ruthless, yeah, it's horrible. But if you're doing it as a sign of respect for those that are going above and beyond and say, look, I care enough about you to introduce accountability at all levels, then yeah, absolutely do that. Accountability is not cruel, right? If we're doing it the right way.
I love that. So last question for you. I feel like you and I could bounce book references back and forth all day, but
sure.
Looking to the future, you're talking to people now. Culture seems to me like it's become, at least people are talking about it a little more and recognizing that it's something important, even if we're having trouble still wrapping our heads around it. So what do you see for the future? Are people going to treat this differently, or are some going to do it and some not? Like, what do you see?
So I'm decidedly on the optimistic side of the equation right now, and part of it, so two reasons. Part of it is we've been pushing this rock uphill for the past 10 years. So we started talking about culture before culture was really in the lexicon, and so we've received every objection you can possibly receive to why you wouldn't care about culture. Mm-hmm. And what is shifting right now, the pandemic gave it an assist, but there's 10,000 baby boomers per day leaving the workforce due to retirement between now and 2029. And with that is a little bit of this outdated mentality, the command and control, the negative aspects of the Welchian model, like those sorts of things are kind of retiring with them. Mm-hmm. And the emerging leaders that are coming up through the ranks right now get identity, get culture, like they're very protective of the social groups that they're in, and they want to enjoy work and they want to be good leaders. Like the other thing that we're seeing gaining more traction than ever before is servant leadership. Mm-hmm. And so with these emerging leaders coming in and saying, no, like I don't view leadership as an award I get for being a top performer as an individual contributor. I actually see it as a responsibility that I want. And I recognize that I'm actually sacrificing to be a leader. It's not a trophy. That just fills us with a tremendous amount of hope and optimism that those are going to be the culture builders of the next 2 decades. They're going to create these structures where psychological safety and emotional intelligence are put at the forefront. And so those are the ones that we're really trying to kind of throw as much weight behind right now as individuals. as kind of an early reforestation, so that when they become the leaders of tomorrow, you know, they're already kind of they believe what we believe, and they just now have the power and the resources to implement.
That's fantastic. I love it. I love a very optimistic view of the future, right? That this is gonna grow. It's not going away. It's gonna become even more powerful. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Feels like it sets my day off. I'm ready to kind of take on the world. So I really appreciate your insights and your wisdom, Shane. And thanks so much for your time.
You as well, Adam. Thanks.
Hey, thanks for watching the Culture Hack. Do you want to chat culture and engagement? Give us a call and come on the show.